Hi, good afternoon, good morning, and in this case, g'day, because we're off to Australia. I'm Martin Gillespie, the host of Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS. And with me today is a delightful, amazing human being based in a suburb in Brisbane, Dr. Nelum. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Martin. Thank you for having me. And lovely to speak to a Scottish, somebody in Scotland, because that's where I graduated from. And it brings back some lovely memories.
Brilliant. What made you, because obviously you're not Scottish, but what made you study in the beautiful city of Aberdeen?
Well, it was very cold and freezing when I was there. Yes. So I'm originally from Sri Lanka. And when I finished school, I did enter university in Sri Lanka, medical school, but there were political problems at the time. Universities closed down for 2 whole years, and at the time, my parents were worried that if I just hang around, I might not do what I'm supposed to be doing. And so so then I kind of got a place at the University of Aberdeen and came across, and it was a bit of a culture shock to say the least, but I loved my 6 years in Aberdeen. It was really special.
Now, Sri Lanka to Aberdeen. I know Aberdeen well. I studied in Aberdeen as well, and we might have been there roughly about the same time. To borrow a good Scottish phrase, it's Baltic. It is so cold at times. Even the polar bears come in off the North Sea because it's that cold.
It's the freezing wind. That's the thing. I was 21 at the time. So it was an adventure. I mean, it was wonderful. It was such an amazing experience. And I made some great friends. And it's such a beautiful place, and Scotland, particularly North Scotland. And we used to travel a lot to the West Coast. So I just loved it. It's such a beautiful place. And it was big enough for me at the time to feel that I was in a city, but small enough that I could walk everywhere. I walked everywhere. So it was really lovely.
It is an exquisite city, and for those who haven't had the pleasure of going to visit it, it is well worthwhile. If you come to Scotland, spend some time in the beautiful city of Aberdeen. But there's a couple of bits there I'm going to hold for a second, but I want to ask you a very important question. What does metabolic health feel for you today, and why is it important to be healthy?
Metabolic health for me, when I think about it, I think it's all about energy. It's energy, it's joy, vitality. It's the ability to spring out of bed in the morning. It's, mental clarity, not having pain. That's what I feel. It's all about that energy. And as a doctor, obviously, metabolic markers are important, but really, I think for me, it's how somebody would feel if they were metabolically well. And that's who I see. Somebody who is, lively, vivacious, energetic. And yeah, that's what I feel. And why is it important? Because at the end of the day, everything comes down to metabolic health, and if you are metabolically healthy, life is so much easier. And unfortunately, a majority of people in Australia, in the UK, and we know that in the US, well, now around the world, are metabolically unhealthy. But the thing is, Martin, and you and I know that it's so simple. Once you understand how metabolic health works, it is such a simple concept. And it's such a pity that somehow that isn't what is being taught, to medical students, to doctors. So we don't look at metabolic health in that kind of as a root cause, or we don't look at it in that holistic fashion. And I think that's such a pity.
Now, going back to the point where you trained in Aberdeen, in the
Yes.
medical training, and regardless of when you're there, how much is taught on nutrition, the importance of sleep, and the correlation of looking at a whole human being?
Well, I graduated nearly 30 years ago, and there was very little of that. Martin, I look back and I think, okay, the science of nutrition was quite in its infancy at that time. So fair enough. If in the 1990s, if we didn't get taught that, but it is unacceptable that in 2024, medical students are not getting that education. And there have been studies published on that, saying that worldwide it is a problem. So no, I didn't get very much, but I actually thought that I was well educated. I really appreciated my medical education. Until, of course, a few years ago, I discovered insulin resistance, and it changed everything.
Now, that's a great segue, because I see a lot of medics who are academically brilliant and brilliant at doing their job, but crap at looking after themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can you share a little bit about your story when you kind of went, wait a minute, I need to change? And the phrase, in order to allow the listener, what you actually mean by insulin resistance.
Okay. I'll tell you about my story first, and I'll get to that. And so I always considered myself healthy. I ate what I was supposed to eat, which was low fat, because, coming from a Sri Lankan background, I ate quite a lot of starch, a lot of lovely rice and roti and all of that. But I was low fat. I was on the right track according to what was said. I exercised a lot. I don't smoke, I don't drink. I'm generally, I manage my stresses, all of that. And, I considered myself healthy until I was heading into my perimenopausal years and started to gain weight, particularly around the belly. Heartburn, snoring, really bad sleep, getting up 3 to 4 times every night, and just thinking that this was the norm, because that's what a lot of my patients said as well. I just said, well, this is menopause, this is the way it is. But really brain fog, really bad brain fog, really bad memory. And I was so worried about that, because I could if I left my workstation when I was at work, I would forget medication names, I'd forget medical conditions. And that was a real concern. I thought that that I would forget how to be a doctor. That was such a big concern for me. But what really got me to do something about this was when I did my blood tests around just after 50, and realized I was pre-diabetic, and all my markers were pointing towards heart disease. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have a very strong family history of type 2 diabetes. My mother was diagnosed at the age of 52. And I just knew that was where I was heading. And, I kept asking myself, oh, why am I in this? Why am I here? Because I'm doing everything that I advise my patients to do. That's what I was taught to do. And I realized that I had to find an alternative. Something else. I had to do something different. And so in that process, I started reading, really listening to podcasts. I did so much research. And that's when I discovered insulin resistance. So insulin is the most important metabolic hormone, and it is to do with the energy production within our cells. So insulin is the hormone that regulates how our cells utilize the food that we eat, how it converts it into energy, and so insulin resistance. So what happens is that we ideally for insulin's main role really is to regulate blood sugar or blood glucose levels. Unfortunately, because of the way we eat in the modern world, which is predominantly sugary, starchy foods, we have high levels of blood glucose levels, and therefore the body has to produce continuously high levels of insulin to manage this. And over time, when you have any hormone that is raised for prolonged periods of time, the cells become resistant to that hormone. So it's basically as if the cells shut their doors towards insulin's message. So then what happens is that insulin can't do its job, and therefore you tend to get high levels of blood glucose levels, and that is very, very toxic in the human body. So insulin resistance is that prolonged, persistently raised insulin levels due to not just what we eat. There are lots of other things that fall into it, but I think food is probably the major player for most people.
So when you talk about, and that's a brilliant definition, but when you talk about food, you and I are of the age that we still remember seasonal vegetables or
Yes.
seasonal foods. In your experience and in your clinical practice, when you talk about food, what's a lot of the answers that you get from your patients? What is food?
What is food? Well, food for a lot of people nowadays is convenience, right? So it's about really it is. It's people have forgotten how to cook, or they don't have the time to cook, and it's all about quick and easy. Run. So breakfast is on the go, or it's something that you can. And I was the same. I'd put those 2-minute oats in the microwave, and I'd be happy with that. But it's all about that. So it's something that you can pick up quickly, put it in the microwave, something, frozen food or something that you have on the run. A lot of people, that's what it is. So one of the things that I really talk about is, getting back to cooking and kind of re-educating people on doing some of that. It is hard because life nowadays is so busy for so many people that time isn't there anymore. I think it's a real problem.
It's a really interesting point, because when I have that conversation with people and around that change, one of the first steps I ask people to do is invest in a simple product called a slow cooker, known in the US as a crock pot.
Yes.
So if you're taking that convenience, let's work on that energy of convenience foods. You can buy really good quality, the older cuts of meat, if that, not older as an age, but the more off cuts of meat, put them in a slow cooker, and you're getting this beautiful, amazing product. Put it on at nighttime, it's there in the morning. And you've got the bone broth, which is so important with its collagen, for God's sake. So if you want convenience foods, don't buy a microwave, buy a slow cooker.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, Martin. Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And slow cooking is the best way to eat meat, right? You're not, that is the best way to eat meat. Well, most foods, I think. Yeah.
Actually, I want to hold you on a little bit, because a really important conversation that sometimes doesn't come up until sort of third or fourth consultation. You were brought up in Sri Lanka, you went to Aberdeen, so very cultural difference. How do you overcome that cultural objection that you may get from some clients going, but I can't eat this because of my religious beliefs?
Well, I mean, for me as well, not necessarily because of religious beliefs, but cultural conditioning. It took me a long time to get my head around eating low carb, because that's what you need to do for insulin resistance. And I thought, well, I'm from a Sri Lankan background. How can I be low carb? So it was difficult, but it can be done, and I do it. It is always with compromise. And from a religious point of view also, well, I mean, you have to be respectful of somebody's beliefs and religion. But I mean, what are they prepared to compromise on? You know, are there ways that we can get around it? But to the South Asians, I say it can be done. I have been doing this for 3 years. You do not need to give up everything that you love and enjoy. And I think it is always going to be a struggle for us because genetically we are kind of not in the best shape either. And then the food that we eat doesn't help, but it can be done. And I speak to the South Asian community and say that we need to include some fasting, and we have to build muscle. That is, you know, those are.
Right. Fasting, a really interesting intermittent fasting or time restriction eating. A lot of people get them very, very similar. I want to talk to you about that in particular, around the differences male and female. A lot of men I see that will start doing intermittent fasting, they see the results. But for a female, it's very different, and it's very different depending on where they're at in their stage in life.
Yes, yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit on your experience from a personal point of view and from a medical point of view, what some of the benefits are and some of the challenges that you have to look out for?
Yes. So I really enjoy fasting, and we, in my practice, we regularly, I support people through fasting because I think it is it has so many benefits in terms of, well, simply you're not eating. So therefore it is much easier if you're thinking of losing weight and improving insulin resistance, but also long-term, more kind of benefits for longevity, you know, autophagy, you know, all of those things. And the convenience of it, you know, you don't have to think of constantly buying food and preparing food. And you really, what you gain is the freedom from food. I think, you know, you can now, you know, it's so easy to go between, you know, I find for a lot of my patients who do this, that's what they say. I'm not constantly thinking about food because they're used to that. In terms of women, and particularly women in the peri-postmenopausal stage, Martin, so there's a lot of controversy about should women in this stage fast or not. And the thing here is that this group of women, there's a lot of other problems that they have in terms of, you know, if you look at their lives, at that period in their life, there's a lot going on. So they might have, you know, health issues themselves. You know, they might have financial issues, relationship issues. They might be looking after elderly parents and having children at home, lots going on. So what happens in a lot of these women's cases is that they are highly stressed. And if you're highly stressed, you have high levels of cortisol. Now, if you have high levels of cortisol, you have high levels of insulin. If you have high levels of insulin, you cannot access your fat stores. So, and then so when you fast, the idea is that the body switches from using the fuel that you get from food to using the fat that you have stored, that you store. If you can't access that fat, then, and you're fasting, and let's say you're fasting for 24 hours, well, you're going to be in a world of pain because how on earth is your body going to fuel? So what I say to this age group or anybody who has a lot of stress is, firstly, you need to be on a low carb way of eating for at least 4 weeks. And so to really kind of, that reduces your insulin levels, and we really need to manage the stress. And that is difficult because these words, manage stress, is an easy 2 words to say, but very, very difficult to do. So, so it's, you know, so some people, some women can fast, and others are not that good at it. But I think just to ensure that they understand that it's a process, it's a gradual process, and they will, you know, it can be done. We just need to be patient sometimes.
An interesting area you mentioned there, especially around females, perimenopause and menopause. Let me ask you, why why not start teaching people these skills at puberty level? Because if we start at that root cause level,
Yes.
therefore, over the tenure of one's life, they become aware of insulin resistance, cortisol levels, listening to your hormones, and I mean both sexes here. But
Yes.
importantly, they can start learning the skills for life.
I mean, Martin, it should be something that's taught at school. I absolutely agree because, I think, I don't know whether you have read Mindy Pelzer's book on Fast Like a Girl. And I think that book should be read by everybody, male and female, because there are always women in men's life. And I think understanding how the hormonal changes in terms of a woman's hormonal changes affects her in so many different ways. I think that is crucial. And if as a society we understood that better, I think we would be in a much better place. Yes.
I think it's really interesting. When we talk about menopause, the first three letters are men. Men, we need to listen to this stuff. We need to learn about it because we also are going through emotional changes.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I'm going to throw something out there. One of the stoic things in the UK and in Australia, you have that men's mentality. She's all right, mate. I'm okay, mate. In your experience, what coaching would you give men to start opening up to valuing going to see a medic like yourself to go, I'm going to tap in once a year at least to get a full medical? Why is
I
that
think
important for men to do that?
because at the end of the day, men are actually metabolically worse off than women. And so they tend to have a lot more problems as they get older than women do. Even though women struggle in their 50s, by the time men are 60, they're not doing well, most of them. Where I would start that conversation are things that are important to men, like erectile dysfunction, things like that, because then they listen because that is important to them. So I think, really talking to men about issues that are important to them and bringing it in. And I think if you show men, I have my male patients, I get them in, and when we do their metabolic screen and really talk about what this means, not all men, but some men are fascinated. I think sometimes men's brains also like, that kind of seeing how it's because it's metabolic health is very simple once you see it, and to see the logic of it. I think there are, some men really are able to appreciate that.
It's a really interesting aspect because, when you look at Australia, for example, on the outside, it looks metabolically healthy. Beautiful country, beautiful landscapes, but it's got the second highest obesity rates in the world, pre-diabetic. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think, well, I mean, no, I do, because it's not just the food, it's our lifestyle as well. I think, even though we have this beautiful outdoors, most people spend their time indoors. Most people spend their time sitting. Um, we talked about shift work, that's becoming more of a problem. And then the food, I mean, at the end of the day, it's the standard Australian diet. It's the same as the standard American diet. It might be that little bit better, but it is terrible. And what do we feed our children? All of these things that we just, and I feel also that there's a real lack of that spiritual side as well in these countries. So I think that is also a lack. And I there's so many. I think we have lost our way, Martin.
An interesting point you said there, a lack of spiritualism. Brilliant area. Do you think there is a lack of purpose with certain people? Like we have this mentality, work till I'm 65 and then retire. So that kind of coincides with the declining age. You know,
Yes.
the declining age of a 64-year-old to a 68-year-old is enormous.
Yes.
So
Yes.
their health span, they're popping pills, for example. They're not healthy. But when you talk about spiritualism, what do you actually mean by that?
Well, I think in these modern societies, we pay a lot of attention to our body and to our brains, but not to our minds. We don't really think about minds. I think very few people talk about things like death or even think about death, and that's a taboo subject. But, in actual fact, I think, the only thing that is a guarantee in this life is that you are going to die. And I think it is important to think about these things because that adds resilience, that gives you value to your life, that gives you some purpose if you actually think about these things. And, I feel when I speak to my patients, a lot of them, because I talk to them, particularly, there are people who are so isolated, who are so alone. And I say to them, do you have a community? It doesn't have to be a religion. Sometimes I say, do you have a faith? Because with that faith usually comes a community, and but they don't. And I think that's a real lack because when things go wrong, there's nothing to hold on to. It's like you're in free fall. Whereas if you have something that you're holding on to, something bigger than yourself, I think that gives you a bit of stability.
It's very interesting because that correlates with work here of an amazing medic in the UK who's doing a lot of work, and she works in A&E.
Yes.
And she was saying that the majority of patients presenting an accident emergency, the root cause of their illness is loneliness.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Now, you mentioned one of the things on your personal journey that when you started going low carb, brain fog started disappearing. But when you clear brain fog, you see things differently, not just with our eyes, but with our feelings.
Yes.
And I would say that that's a massive underlining benefit of following a low carb ketogenic lifestyle.
Yes.
Why is this not advocated from the rooftops?
Well, there's so many things that should be advocated, Martin, but are not. And there's so much that this is not difficult stuff, is it? And the thing is that we could talk for hours on why it is not, and I think there are there are agendas there, and because who is going to benefit if everybody started eating whole foods and doing exercise? Apart from the individual themselves, none of the corporates are going to benefit. So that's, I suppose, where the problem is. So who funds this research? Because we're in a time where everything has to be research based and accepted, but these things, they're not always research. We can't always do the type of research we need to with these. I mean, I think sometimes we have to use common sense because our ancestors who lived, who've been humans just like us, who've lived for the last 200,000 years, didn't need research to tell them that eating whole food or getting out and running around is good for them.
I think, I'm going to put it to you, I think that we have lost the inability to trust our gut feelings.
Absolutely.
And when you clear your gut in a low carb ketogenic lifestyle, everything changes. I was going to say you become sexier, and I mean it in a metaphorical way, because you become more attractive to yourself. You magnetize a different vibration.
Yeah.
And your aura completely changes. You will, one of the things that I also would say is, when you're on this transition, letting people aware that you are doing it, because you may lose some friends along the way, but you will gain a different community.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I want to relate that to the work that you're doing, because you've got a tribe of, it's not just you in isolation doing this in Brisbane. You've got a tribe of 2 others who have got brilliant skills to have that holistic approach for the patient care, the personalized patient care. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that? Because it's fantastic.
Yes. So I work with 2 amazing women. I work with Deb, who's a nurse, and Ronit, who's a life coach. And really, Martin, it just we were friends long before any of this happened. And the only reason I thought, the only reason so we are whole food revolution. That's what we call ourselves. And the reason why it came into being was because I realized that I couldn't give my patients the information and all of that I needed to give in a clinical setting. I couldn't do it in a Medicare, kind of Medicare setting in general practice. So I thought I needed to take it out. And then also the realization that what I was teaching, which was the science, wasn't enough. It was really important, but there was more to it. And so Deb is a very experienced nurse. She looks at things differently. And so she is the one who does the practical aspect of things. So I teach the science. She talks about implementation of that science. And then Ronit is all about the mind. So we have this very holistic approach of mind, the science, lifestyle, and mindset. And I truly and utterly believe that that is the only way that we can achieve sustainable change.
I totally agree. Now, we mentioned, and I want to elaborate a little bit more around this area that has really crept into a lot of people's life, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years: shift working. We automatically think of people working shifts, and you think of nurses, airline pilots, bus drivers. But the common person, I hate that phrase, the common person, but we are all becoming shift workers. We're working late at night. We're wired to technology devices. What impact does that have on one's metabolic well-being?
It's massive. It's absolutely massive, Martin, because I think firstly, the impact on sleep. And, because you cannot possibly be a shift worker and get the right amount and the quality and the consistency of sleep that is required. And we know that sleep is so incredibly important for metabolic health. And even one night of poor sleep pushes up your insulin, you get more insulin resistant. So you can just imagine if you are somebody who's doing shift work, and particularly those shifts changing very rapidly in the week, it is a disaster. It is a disaster, and it's just in so many ways, because there's just no ability to rest. Most people who are shift workers really can't get sleep during the day. It's just, it's very, very difficult. Or if they do get sleep, it is a very short amount of broken sleep, because you can't get 7 hours of, regular sleep during the daytime. I think it's very hard to do that. So a lot of my patients, they will come back from a night shift, sleep for a short period in the morning, then get up and do something, and then another short bit before they go back to work. So I think it's very dysfunctional, because when do you actually meet up with your family? When do you kind of go out, enjoy your life? It's very, very difficult, but it's the norm, isn't it? So, I mean, families do it, as you said, for because it works financially. And when you have young children, it's something that sometimes husbands and wives do. But, you know, at what cost, I think, and I don't think that people realize the impact on their health.
I think there's a great TED talk and a great book by Matt Walker on
Oh,
why
yes.
sleep.
Love him. Love
Now,
him. Yes.
again, going back to men's health, I would recommend every man and every woman to watch this 20-minute TED talk as a great segue to understand why sleep is important. For men in particular, sleep is a critical aspect. When you lack sleep, from a scientific point of view, can you elaborate a little bit what that does to you?
Oh my goodness. So, firstly, you know, sleep is humans spend 1/3 of their life sleeping. Well, we should. So the fact that, you know, nothing in nature is an accident, or it is the reason why we spend that amount of time sleeping is because it is absolutely essential to our well-being. So nowadays, we sometimes people feel that, you know, that the fear of missing out. So they are on their phones, on this, on that. And even so, the biggest thing that I find is that people don't allow themselves to sleep. So sleep, and also the other thing, Martin, is people think that taking a sleeping tablet and getting sleep that way is actually sleep, but it's not. It's just you're just knocking yourself out. It's completely different from sleep, because sleep has, I'm not going to go into all the detail, but sleep has stages that are absolutely important, you know, deep sleep, REM sleep, all of that do different, have different areas of importance for our brain, for our functioning, for our metabolic health. And if we don't give ourselves time to have that proper sleep, then we are going to miss out on this, and we can't actually catch it up, according to Matt Walker. Once you've missed your sleep, you've missed your sleep. And so it's I think
an interesting point, going back to the conversation around intermittent fasting.
Yes.
What would be your thoughts if we started applying that to technology? Because we're all wired to technology these days. We're all wired to the mobile phone or the laptop. What about having a day a week of technology free?
Brilliant. Absolutely. So, Martin, every year I go off and do a meditation retreat for 9 days. And this is a silent retreat. And I actually lock my phone in my suitcase, so that, and I run it down completely, and I have 9 days of absolute freedom from any technology, because I just have I don't even have a digital, I have what do you call it? Just a regular old-fashioned watch. I don't even have, because what I find is that as I'm coming closer to the end of this retreat, I find myself not wanting to get back with that phone again, because I know that as soon as I'm attached to that phone, it's as if a switch has been turned on and I'm back to my old habits. And I think if people can have at least 1 day off, I think that would be brilliant. But I don't think it will happen. I think we are a little bit addicted to this.
We're always learning. It's something I have been trying to do every Sunday, not using my phone. And I'm struggling. It's hard work, right? You want to listen to a podcast. I'm sort of going, that's okay, but you have a tendency to check in with your email with that. Stop it. Have that divorce from your phone once a week.
Yes, I think that's a brilliant idea.
I want to also talk to you about an amazing growth. And I was going to say growth because it's now becoming more mainstream. The power of breathing and cold water immersion.
Yes. Yes.
Now, when you're born, you actually breathe properly. As we develop, we are now not breathing well enough. But then when you start applying cold water, the Wim Hof mentality, the cold showers, why are those two things forgotten about?
Oh, Martin, I think, all of these are, things that our ancestors knew. And, humans have always known this. It's just in the last, I think, maybe, I don't know, 50, 60 years that we've forgotten, right? Like fasting. Fasting has been done by all cultures in humanity. And so I think it's this new this scientific age that thinks that everything has to be research based and all of that. I think that's why we poo-poo these kind of more traditional ancient wisdom that our ancestors had. It's just as if, well, what do they know? But of course, I think I completely believe that we have to look at our evolutionary biology, because that is where the information is. That's what we need to be doing now. So yeah, and all this, I think I read somewhere um, about, we are now constantly in a thermoneutral environment. We do not let our don't get we yes, in obviously in Brisbane in the summer we are very hot and humid, but mostly we are in inside, heating, air conditioning, everything is exactly as it should. Nothing changes. So we don't allow ourselves, our bodies never get the chance to get to those very cold or very hot temperatures. So, all of these things, is that good for us? These are, that's not how we were biologically made, right? We were made to have these ups and downs so that the body, that hermetic stress, that so that by having these stresses that don't kill you, basically, you get stronger, you get more resilience.
I think an area that people forget, when they go into the ocean, or here in Scotland, they go into the lake, the lochs, we don't call them lakes, the lochs. You've got so many beautiful minerals that get absorbed by our bodies as well.
That's true. That's true. Yes.
That we are in this fight or flight. Many people still eating lots of ultra processed foods, so depletion of magnesium, an essential mineral. Where's the best source? Ocean water. Get out there, get in the water, for God's sake. Get on with your life. It is, and guess what? It's that four-letter word that Scottish people don't like saying. It's free. It is available in abundance. One area which you mentioned, which is really, really important, and I would love your knowledge on this. Cortisol in the body. What does that actually do to you?
Well, cortisol is a really important hormone. And if you look at the way, we have evolved, cortisol is absolutely essential for our, well-being in terms of the acute cortisol. So when we have an acute stress response, cortisol is a stress hormone, and it is released when our body is under threat. And the way we were designed was that during periods of danger, that we would be able to release this cortisol, which then triggers us to be more vigilant and get us to basically safety. That's to make sure that we weren't eaten by the tiger or whatever. But unfortunately, what's happening in today's world is that so many situations that aren't actually life-threatening, and a lot of these are actually our thought processes are triggering this excess cortisol. And so if you have high cortisol, which is again a hormone, for prolonged periods of time without, so we don't seem to get, sorry, so if you go back to that prehistoric ancestor who had a high cortisol, that would have been in relationship to some kind of an event that was, some kind of threat that they were facing. So they would fight, they would flee, or they would freeze, and then the threat would go away, and then their cortisol levels will come down, and that was the end of that. But what happens nowadays is that we never seem to get to an end, that cortisol level coming down. It's constantly elevated because there's always something happening. So if you think of what cortisol does to your body in an acute situation, so just if you go from head to toe, in the brain, you're hyper vigilant, you are, looking around, you need to have high blood pressure, you need to have good blood pressure to be able to run away. Your muscles are tense to be able to do the fighting. Your heart's beating really fast. You're breathing really fast. You've shut down your gut. You've shut down any sex hormones or any reproductive thing, because that's the last thing you're going to think about when these tigers coming to eat you, and so all of these things are happening, but they should be only happening in the short term. But if this is happening all the time, you can imagine what it is doing to your body. So, the hypervigilance, not being able to relax. So people who have post-traumatic stress syndrome, that's what happens to them. They're sitting happily having a conversation in the kitchen, a pot falls, and they're kind of jumping off their chair because that has triggered them. High blood pressure, heart attacks, gut issues, infertility, not being able to have sexual, proper sexual function, all of these things, and then mood disorders, because you're so, after a while, you can't maintain this kind of high levels of cortisol, this vigilance that that drains you down, poor sleep, all of these things, just such high cortisol, I think, so cortisol sits on top of insulin in terms of the hormonal hierarchy. So if you have high cortisol, that is going to really impact your metabolic health. And you cannot have good metabolic health if you have high cortisol.
So I want to ask you a couple more questions. One major question I have for you. What does health education look like and feel like for the future?
Right. That's a big one, Martin. I think first, universities have to be banned from accepting funding from pharmaceuticals. I think that's the first thing, because universities have to be independent bodies that are not skewed in what they teach. And I think we have to teach future students, medical students in particular, about how we evolved, evolutionary biology. I think that has to be how we teach them, because here we are, somehow, humans just like us have lived on this planet for 200,000 years. It's just this last 60 to 70 years that we somehow think that we know it all, that somehow, and we have to go back and look at what humans did, how they lived, to get the answers of what we need to be doing, and I think it's really important, and teaching, and really looking at the root causes, and I think we need to first teach that. And, there will always be disease that comes along, and then we can address disease. But I think, so get rid of the funding, always teach, in terms of evolutionary biology and root cause medicine. I think that.
Brilliant. Now, how do people contact you? Because although you're based in Brisbane, you do a lot of work, I know, all over Australia, and you've got that team, but how do people get in contact with you?
So they can contact me via Whole Food Revolution. So our email is hello@wf wholefoodrevolution.com.au. And we have a Facebook page, so Whole Food Revolution, and we have a beautiful community, Whole Food Revolution community. And website is www.wholefoodrevolution.com.au, and they can contact me through there as well.
I could talk to you for hours because you are a wealth of knowledge, but more importantly, your authenticity about sharing stories without the BS, sharing your insights as a human being. We forget that we are humans before we become doctors. We're humans before we become anything else. Go back to that human kindness of self-love, trusting your gut feelings, and also sharing this knowledge with others. And that's the beauty of this podcast and sharing time with you today, that I've got pages of gold here. It's going to take me at least 2 coffees to go through these with you, with myself. On behalf of everybody here at Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS, thank you for the gift of your generous time, your wisdom, your wit, a little bit of laughter, and more importantly, your beautiful smile to welcome me on this day. Nelum, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much.